In this video, I'm going to take you to 10 off-the-beaten-trail sites that tell the story of Berlin during the Second World War and the era of the Third Reich. If you're planning a trip to Berlin, you almost certainly have the big central World War II sites on your must-visit list. However, Berlin has so many more attractions that are equally worth a visit. But these are locations that the first-time visitor either doesn't have time for or doesn't even know about. And I've put these locations on a map that I will link to in the description below so that you can visit these sites when you come to Berlin, or you could hire me, Steve, from Experienced Berlin Tours to show you around. I'll also leave my contact details in the description below. All right, let's get started.
And for our first stop, we start in Mitte. You've heard of Schindler's List, but have you heard of Otto Weidt? Right here in the heart of Berlin, this small workshop became a quiet battlefield of resistance. And with so many museums and memorials in the city focusing on the terrible crimes perpetrated by the Nazis, this museum's focus on heroism is a welcome change. Otto Weidt ran a broom and brush factory for the blind, but behind the walls he was forging papers, bribing officials, and hiding his Jewish employees from the Gestapo. Despite his courageous efforts, Weidt was ultimately only able to save a few from being murdered, though he never stopped trying. He wasn't famous, no movie or book was made about him, but to the people he saved, he was everything. And inside you'll learn how Weidt, an anarchist who himself was legally blind, managed to keep his people out of the hands of the Gestapo as long as he did. You'll learn about his employees, how they made their brooms, and what their ultimate fates were. You will also learn about the people who helped Weidt, including the officers in a local police precinct who tipped off Weidt on impending raids. The museum delves into the complex system of racial rules and injustices and tells the story of the struggle for decency. The museum is only a few rooms, and there's a free audio guide that will guide you through the museum. You probably won't spend more than 45 minutes to an hour here at most. The museum is free to visit, and it's located in a passage adjacent to the Hackische Höfe. And its central location, within walking distance to both Alexanderplatz and Museum Island, means that there's much to do and see nearby. Okay, moving on. In the western Berlin district of Grunewald, adjacent to the Grunewald S-Bahn station, is perhaps Berlin's most evocative memorials to the horrors of the Third Reich. When you arrive at the station, just follow the signs for Gleis 17, or Track 17. Grunewald was one of 3 train stations in Berlin where Jews were expelled from the city and sent to ghettos and labor and concentration camps. Most were murdered or died from inhumane conditions. The memorial was dedicated in 1998 under the direction of the Deutsche Bahn, which was acknowledging the role of its predecessor, the Reichsbahn, in these atrocities. The memorial features 186 steel plates embedded along the platform's edges, all in chronological order. Each plate records the date, the destination, and the number of deportees on a specific transport. Sometimes only a few dozen passengers are recorded, but often it was over 1,000. The tracks are weathered, rusty, and overgrown with vegetation. And I found the tracks leading into the wilderness to be an apt metaphor for the realities of these unfortunate souls almost a century ago. On the side of the tracks, on the slope leading up from the train station's main entrance, is a monument that predates this memorial. It's a long concrete wall with the indentations of human forms walking to the platform, which I took as representing a void of humanity. And according to the memorial marker, over 50,000 Jews were deported from here alone. In my opinion, there's something particularly moving about this location, as you are on the spot where this terrible history played out. So be sure to carve out some time to pay your respects on your visit to Berlin. This giant concrete cylinder was never meant to survive, but it tells the story of a world that could have been. The Schwerbelastungskoeper, or heavy load-bearing body, was a test. Hitler wanted to rebuild Berlin into a new Nazi capital called Germania. The redesigned German capital would be home to several monumental structures, the most fantastic being the 300-meter square and 300-meter tall Volkshalle. But this monstrosity was built to test Berlin's sandy soil to see if it can hold another one of his delusions of grandeur. This test was for a planned Arc de Triomphe. Only this German arch would be twice as tall and 4 times as wide as the one found in Paris. The structure actually consists of 2 concrete cylinders weighing a combined 12,000 tons. The lower cylinder has a diameter of 11 meters and reaches 18 meters underground. On top of that is the more visible concrete cylinder, which has a diameter of 21 meters and rises 15 meters above the ground. Plans for the arch were put on hold due to the war, and it was instead used as an air raid shelter. After the war, it was determined that the structure had indeed sunk roughly 20 centimeters and was slightly off kilter. So Hitler's plans for this arch would likely not have been possible, at least not at such a grand scale. It was deemed too risky to nearby residential areas to blow up, so it was left, eventually becoming the documentation center that it is today. There's only enough to keep you here for about 30 minutes. You could wander inside and see some rusted equipment and peek down below into the lower chamber. There are some signs explaining the structure, as well as how French forced laborers were employed in its construction, and climb up the adjacent tower for views of the structure from above, as well as nice 360-degree views of Berlin. It's free to enter, but donations are accepted. And if you're interested in Nazi architecture, this is definitely a stop that you need to make. Hidden in a quiet neighborhood in southeast Berlin is one of the city's most chilling World War II sites you've probably never heard of. This was once a Nazi forced labor camp, one of more than 3,000 that existed in Berlin alone, and the only one to survive intact to this day. Roughly 30 million people, mostly from Europe, are estimated to have been forced into labor by the Nazis inside of the German Reich, as well as occupied territories. These workers were teenagers, mothers, carpenters, farmers. They were torn from their homes, shipped to camps like this one, and forced to build Hitler's war machine. And many would never make it back. But their voices and stories can still be heard within the walls of these buildings today. This former camp now houses the Nazi Zwangsarbeitszentrum, or in English, the Nazi Forced Labor Documentation Center. Its 14 stone barracks all still exist, of which half are reserved for exhibit and event spaces. The camp was designed under the supervision of Albert Speer to house roughly 2,000 internees at a time. And using this camp as a backdrop, the center aims to tell the story of the Nazi forced labor programs. Through photos, documents, artifacts, as well as eyewitness accounts, you will learn how the Nazis rounded up and documented forced laborers. You will also learn about how these workers were treated and the many rules and regulations that they had to follow. Rules and regulations that were largely based on a worker's racial identity, with Soviet citizens and Jews receiving the most appalling treatments. And lastly, you will learn about the liberation of the camps. At the time of filming, a special exhibition covering the liberation of the camps for the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II is taking place. The buildings of the other half of the camp are used for other enterprises, including an auto body shop and what seemed to me to be a garden center. If a deep dive into Berlin's World War II history is what you are after, then put this important memorial on your bucket list. On the northern edges of Berlin's inner ring lies Humboldthain, a leafy city park named after the Prussian Renaissance man Alexander von Humboldt. But the park has something interesting that makes this a place of interest for those interested in World War II history. On the northern edge of the park is an artificial hill consisting of debris resulting from the war. And this rubble fills in parts of the remains of a flak tower. 3 of these towers were constructed during the war to ward off Allied bombing raids on the city. And this one measured 70 meters wide by 40 meters in height. And sitting atop each of the 4 turrets were 128mm Flak 40 guns, some of the most powerful guns in use during World War II. Additionally, the towers also house several 37 and 20mm guns to counter low and mid-range enemy fighter planes. The fortress is pockmarked from bullet and artillery rounds. 2 of the 3 towers were destroyed during the war, but by chance circumstances, the tower at Humboldthain was only partially destroyed. And you can even tour parts of the inside with the Berlin-Unterwelten group from April through October. It's also a great location for free views of Berlin, mostly to the north and west of the tower. The Flak Tower is also used as a climbing wall, and each gun tower has an accompanying radio and command tower. These towers housed radar and range-finding equipment and provided coordinates for the gunners on the main towers to fire at. And the ruins of one of these are also here on the southern side of Volkspark Humboldthain. Okay, moving on. In Berlin, there are 3 rather large memorials dedicated to Soviet Red Army soldiers, particularly those who fought and died in the Battle of Berlin. Many visitors will visit the one in Tiergarten, just 100 meters away from the Brandenburg Gate. Still others will visit the even more monumental Soviet War Memorial in Treptower Park. But few will venture out to the northern edge of the city to visit the Soviet War Memorial in Schönholzer Heide, in the district of Pankow. and although it is smaller than its Treptow Park counterpart, it is the largest in terms of burials, with just over 13,000 of the roughly 80,000 Red Army soldiers who fell during the Battle of Berlin. It has the outward expression of grandioseness that I've come to expect from Soviet war memorials, and you are greeted at the entrance to a track leading into the center flanked by poplar trees. The main focal point of the memorial is a stone obelisk and the statue of Mother Russia. There are bronze reliefs depicting heroic scenes, bronze insignias for the different branches of the Soviet military. Flanking both sides of the main axis are the burial chambers, 8 on each side, each containing 1,182 of the fallen. The names of those identified are listed on the panels. It's the most peaceful of the 3 Soviet Red Army memorials, but it's the least visited due to its location. It's on the route towards Sachsenhausen concentration camp, or you could transfer to a bus from Pankow station. Okay, on to our next location. Here's an off-the-beaten-path World War II location that you're likely not aware of. Located in southeastern Berlin is the Museum of Berlin-Karlshorst, previously known as the Russian-German Museum of Berlin-Karlshorst. The building was originally built for officers in training in the German Wehrmacht's Fortress Engineering School. It was captured by the Red Army and used as a command post during the latter stages of the Battle of Berlin. Its officers' mess hall was the location where Part 2 of the unconditional surrender of Germany's armed forces took place on May 8th of 1945. The Soviet military administration would use the building as its headquarters in the immediate years following the war. The building and the surrounding campus would be a Soviet enclave in the 1990s, hosting the largest foreign field office of the KGB. Today, it's a museum that focuses on German-Russian relations, particularly during the war. The ground level is dedicated almost exclusively to the surrender, where you can see the actual surrender documents in several languages. The upper floors contain an exhibition that covers the pre-war relations between Germany and the Soviet Union, as well as German rule in the occupied areas, Soviet prisoners of war, how the Soviets rallied and built a coalition against the Nazis, and ending with the Battle of Berlin. There is also an open-air exhibit that shows various pieces of Soviet armor that was used in the assault on Berlin, including tanks, self-propelled guns, and howitzers. There's also a Soviet T-34 tank, as well as a piece of the Berlin Wall on the other side of the building. This is one of those places to visit where history was made, and one that I recommend for those who are interested in World War II history. Now on to our next stop. In the Berlin district of Charlottenburg-Wilhelmsdorf is another of Berlin's off-the-beaten-path World War II related sites. And in my opinion, it's a must-visit, especially for visitors from the Commonwealth. This is the location of the Berlin War Cemetery, the final resting place of more than 3,600 souls, the majority of who flew under the direction of the Royal Air Force's Bomber Command. As a sign that the entry informs you, the airmen buried here died flying sorties over Germany, in particular around Berlin, during the Second World War. Roughly 55,000 airmen of the Bomber Command died, the result of an astonishing 44% death rate. Respect earned and honor given at this cemetery. And it starts with the comforting grass-carpeted walkway flanked by what I believe are poplar trees. A short incline brings you to the entrance gate where there is a guest book as well as a graves directory. The graves fan out from the entrance in 5 main aisles of white Portland stones. It's immediately obvious how well kept this cemetery is. The central aisle leads to the Stone of Remembrance in the middle of the cemetery and the Cross of Sacrifice at its far end. I lost count how many different branch insignias that I saw, and as expected, they were fallen from all members of the Commonwealth. Roughly 80% of the burials here are from the Royal Air Forces, and roughly 10% are unidentified. The ages of those who died really stand out, with most ranging from 19 to 24. There are mementos, photos, and cards left by family members, some writing to the fathers they never met. Some buried here were prisoners of war who died in captivity. There are also 5 members of the Polish Armed Forces in Britain, and also buried here are 265 occupation administration staff and family members, including very young children. As an American, this cemetery really reminded me of the connection between the military traditions of my country and the Commonwealth. There is an app available for virtual or on-site self-guided tours that you could download. Be sure to add this to your bucket list of things to see in Berlin, and you can visit it in conjunction with a visit to Olympic Stadium or Teufelsberg. Now, this next suggestion is not limited to just one location. The city cemeteries in Berlin are well kept and often very beautiful places to have a wander. I don't think many visitors to the city actually visit them. I touched upon this in a previous video, but if you enter cemeteries such as the Old Garrison Cemetery in Berlin's Mitte district, you will find reminders of the tragedy of the Second World War. Take a look around and you will notice that many of the tombs and gravestones still show signs that they were hit by small arms fire and mortar blasts. But even more jarring is when you come across the mass graves of locals who died during the numerous air raids or fighting during the Battle of Berlin. And in this cemetery, there are over 1,300, mostly civilians, who died in the very last days of the war, and they're all buried in this one large mass grave. There are many unknowns, as well as peoples whose date of death could not be determined. And you're likely to find graves of similar victims, if not mass graves, at most of Berlin's cemeteries, especially the closer you are to the city center. In Kreuzberg, there are a number of cemeteries in close vicinity of one another, but you will stumble upon these graves, as well as damaged tombs. Not your typical tourist attraction, I agree, but meaningful ones if you want to really understand Berlin during the Second World War. Okay, moving on. Here is another stop where history took place. This time we are leaving Berlin and heading into the neighboring city of Potsdam, to Cecilienhof. Built in 1917 for Crown Prince Wilhelm and his wife Cecilia, this English Tudor-style palace is unlike any other royal residence in Germany. But Cecilienhof is best known as the site of the Potsdam Conference, the third major conference between the Allied powers. In 1945, Churchill, Truman, and Stalin met right here to decide the fate of post-war Europe. It was the last major conference between the Allies and the only one to take place after Germany surrendered. It was here that the world map was redrawn and the Cold War began to take shape. Today you can walk through the very rooms where history was made, exploring exhibits on World War II and the Cold War, and enjoy peaceful strolls in the surrounding UNESCO-listed New Garden. And there's so much to experience here, so put this on your list for consideration.
Now, there are several locations that I've left off of this list, mostly for time considerations. So in the comment section, let me know what locations you think I should cover in a potential future video. And check out this video, which is part one of a two-part series where I walk around Berlin and show you battle damage from World War II and the Battle of Berlin, or this playlist here with tips for the visitor to Berlin. And I'll see you in the next